Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin. We're a channel dedicated to sharing stories from the heart of the West, stories that resonate with those of us who've seen a bit of life. I reckon that's most of you out there, especially if you're past 40 and into the golden years. Today, we got a real humdinger for you, a story about redemption, second chances, and the unbreakable spirit of both man and beast. But before we get started, if you like tales of the Old West, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. We don't want you missing none of our videos. So, settle in, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get to it, partner. Now, the old-timers in Copper Ridge always said that some stories are just too wild to believe, even when they're staring you right in the face. They claimed folks were prone to exaggeration, that memories faded and morphed over time, twisting the truth like a wind-whipped tumbleweed. They'd seen it all, or so they thought, from cattle rustlin, schemes to gold rush dreams gone bust. But on a frostbitten morning in late October, when ranchhand Dylan Cross stumbled upon something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about second chances, even those skeptical old-timers would finally understand that sometimes, just sometimes, the most impossible miracles happen to the very people who need them the most. And let me tell you, Dylan Cross was a man who surely needed a miracle, considering the hand life had dealt him. Had life been a game of poker, it had dealt him a 7 and a 2 of different suits. What he found chained to that ancient oak tree out in the middle of nowhere would not only save a life, it would transform an entire community and prove that even the most broken souls can find their way back to hope, back to purpose, back to a reason to believe in the goodness of the world. It was one of those stories that spreads like wildfire, changing lives like the changing seasons. And before we dive headfirst into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We're curious to see just how far our tales of the West can travel, how many hearts they might touch. Do you think stories of redemption and resilience resonate around the world? And while you're down there, give that like button another tap if you haven't already. Remember, this is Saddle and Sixskin. The morning mist hung thick over Copper Ridge like a gray funeral shroud, and Dylan Cross pulled his worn denim jacket tighter against the October chill as he walked the fence line of the old Whitmore ranch. Every breath he took sent a puff of white into the cold air, a silent testament to the bitter temperature of the late Montana autumn. He knew the work that lay ahead of him was tedious, but it was a job, and Dylan Cross was grateful to have a job, especially after what happened in his past. It helped to clear his mind and provided a much-needed distraction from the ghosts of his past. The wind howled like an angry wolf through the pine trees, rattling the barbed wire and adding to the somber atmosphere. At 38, Dylan had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent his life working with wire and wood, fixing what others had broken, and coaxing life from stubborn soil. His lean frame moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that rushing only led to more problems. His frame was as strong as it was slender. A result of hard work for the duration of his life. He was a man who was built to endure. The deep lines around his green eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights counting bills he couldn't pay, thinking of the past he would rather forget. The hard work had its rewards, but his troubled past cast a shadow on the present. The Whitmore place had been his home for 3 years now, ever since old Benjamin Whitmore took pity on him and offered him work in exchange for the small cabin behind the main house. It wasn't much. 1,000 acres of Montana grassland that had seen better days, with fences that sagged like tired shoulders and pastures that grew more weeds than feed. Most of the land was unworkable. Much of the infrastructure was in disrepair. Yet, the place had a certain charm, a certain character that resonated with Dylan. It was a place that was rough around the edges, just like him. But for a man with nowhere else to go, and a past he'd rather forget, it was salvation wrapped in barbed wire and morning chores. It was better than wandering aimlessly, better than facing the memories that haunted his dreams. It was a chance to start over, to rebuild, to find some measure of peace in the solitude of the Montana wilderness. The wide open plains and the endless horizon suited his nature. A lone wolf at the edges of society, like his work. Dylan had been walking these same fence lines since dawn, checking for breaks in the wire that separated Whitmore's land from the national forest beyond. The work was solitary and methodical. Exactly the kind of routine that kept his mind from wandering to darker places. The rhythm of the work, the repetition of the tasks, allowed him to focus on the present moment, shutting out the voices of the past that always threatened to overwhelm him. He preferred the monotony of the job to any form of thinking. He carried his grandfather's old toolbox, the metal worn smooth from decades of use, and stopped every few hundred yards to tighten a loose post or splice a broken wire. The sun was just beginning to burn through the mist when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. The toolbox felt heavy in his hand, a tangible connection to a simpler time, a time before the mistakes he'd made, before the pain he carried. It was a reminder of his roots, of the values that had been instilled in him, values of hard work, honesty, and resilience. But what was the sound? Something was very wrong. It started low, almost like the wind moaning through the pines. But there was something distinctly alive about it, something in pain. The sound seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his feet, a primal cry of suffering that resonated deep within his soul. He cocked his head in its direction, and with every step, the cry grew louder and clearer. It was the sound of labored breathing. He was right. Something was in pain. Dylan stopped walking and cocked his head, listening. The sound came again, clearer this time, and he realized with a jolt that it was the labored breathing of something large, something struggling. It wasn't the sound of a wild animal, not a coyote or a mountain lion. It was something else, something bigger, something in desperate need of help. At this point, he knew something was very wrong, and the feeling of dread began to grow in the pit of his stomach. The sound was getting closer, meaning he was on the right path. He followed the sound deeper into the forest, his boots crunching through the carpet of fallen leaves. The breathing grew louder with each step, accompanied now by the faint clink of metal against wood. The clinking noise confused him as he struggled to determine the direction of the sounds. Why would a wild animal be making the noise of metal? Dylan's heart began to race as he pushed through a thick stand of serviceberry bushes and emerged into a small clearing dominated by a massive oak tree that had probably been standing since before Montana was even a state. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Collapsed at the base of the oak was the largest horse Dylan had ever seen. The animal was easily 18 hands high, maybe more, with a coat so black it seemed to absorb the pale morning light. It was a sight to behold, even in such dire circumstances. Black and slick like crude oil. But it was the chains that made Dylan's stomach lurch. Surely, such a magnificent creature could not be in chains. How could that be? Thick, heavy chains wrapped around the horse's neck and body, securing it to the ancient tree like some medieval prisoner. The chains looked cruel and archaic, a barbaric method of restraint that seemed out of place in this modern world. Dylan's gut twisted with anger and disgust as he took in the scene. The metal had cut deep into the animal's hide, leaving raw, weeping wounds that told the story of desperate struggles to break free. The horse's breathing was shallow and ragged, each exhale creating a small cloud of vapor in the cold air. Its ribs showed starkly beneath the black coat, and Dylan could see that it hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe weeks. This beautiful beast had been starved, and chained, and punished. One massive hoof scraped weakly at the ground, the only sign that the animal was still fighting to survive. But what stopped Dylan's heart was the piece of paper tied to the chain around the horse's neck. With trembling hands, he untied the note and unfolded it, squinting to read the hastily scrolled words. His name is Goliath. I can't feed him anymore. He's too big, too wild, too much trouble. Maybe someone else can save him. I'm sorry. The note wasn't signed, but Dylan could see water stains on the paper. Whether from rain or tears, he couldn't tell. In any case, it was a message born from desperation, a cry for help masked in a confession of failure. The poor author, leaving behind an animal they could no longer afford, likely full of grief. His hand shook as he folded the note and looked down at the dying giant at his feet. Goliath's eyes were the color of deep amber. And when they met Dylan's gaze, he saw something that pierced straight through to his soul. A desperate, intelligent awareness that seemed to be asking one simple question. The connection was instant, a silent communication that transcended words. Dylan felt a surge of empathy for the suffering animal, a sense of shared pain, and an urgent desire to help. He had to help this magnificent beast. Are you here to help? Or are you here to watch me die? That's the question I'm certain Goliath was asking. Dylan had never owned a horse in his life. Hell, he could barely afford to feed himself, let alone a 000lb animal that looked like it could eat its weight in hay every day. The smart thing, the practical thing would be to call the sheriff's office and let them deal with it. A horse like this was expensive and dangerous. It was the kind of burden that could crush a man who was already struggling to survive. But the look in Goliath's eyes was a call for help. He had to act. Animal control would come out, assess the situation, and probably decide the kindest thing would be to put the poor creature out of its misery. That would be the humane thing to do, the cost-effective thing to do. But as Dylan knelt beside Goliath's massive head and looked into those amber eyes, he found himself whispering words that surprised even him. I'm going to get you out of here, boy. I don't know how, but I'm not leaving you to die. He couldn't let this majestic creature perish. The horse's ear flickered toward him, and Dylan could have sworn he saw the faintest spark of hope kindle in those intelligent eyes. The two connected in that moment. A feeling of hope began to form inside of him. He stood up and examined the chains more carefully, his mind already working on the problem. The metal was old, but strong, secured with a heavy padlock that looked like it would take bolt cutters to break. The chains had been wrapped around Goliath's neck and chest in multiple layers, creating a web of metal that would be impossible to slip out of, even for a horse of Goliath's size. Dylan ran back to his cabin and returned with every tool he could carry, bolt cutters, wire cutters, a hacksaw, and even an old pry bar he'd found in the barn. This may take a while. All the tools that he had could save Goliath from his predicament. This required careful and precise action. The work was slow and painstaking, and several times he had to stop when Goliath tried to struggle, afraid the animal would injure itself further. But gradually, link by link, he began to free the giant horse from its metal prison. As he worked, Dylan found himself talking to Goliath in a low, steady voice, the way his grandfather used to talk to spooked cattle. Steady now, boy, Dylan would say. Easy does it. We're gonna get you out of here, just you wait. It was important that he stay calm and focused on saving the horse. He told the horse about the ranch, about the pasture where he could run free, about the hay and the barn and the clear stream that ran along the property's eastern border. He wasn't sure if Goliath understood the words, but the horse seemed to calm at the sound of his voice, breathing more steadily as the chains fell away. The whole time, the horse was listening to him and seemed to calm his nerves through Dylan's calming voice. The more Dylan spoke, the calmer the beast became. The sound of his voice allowed for this transformation. When the last chain hit the ground with a metallic clang, Goliath didn't immediately try to stand. Instead, the great horse lay still, as if he couldn't quite believe he was truly free. It was a poignant moment, a symbol of liberation, a testament to the power of compassion. But what would Goliath do? Dylan sat back on his heels, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold morning air, and watched as Goliath slowly, carefully began to test his newfound freedom. He sat and hoped that this could be a sign of a new beginning. Maybe Dylan had found a companion who also understands what it's like to have a new beginning. Maybe Dylan could use this as an opportunity to turn a new leaf in his life. The horse's first attempt to rise failed, his weakened legs unable to support his massive frame. But on the second try, with a grunt of effort that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, Goliath heaved himself upright. The horse was still weak, but the fire in his spirit allowed him to stand. The fire allowed him to show his true beauty. The beast was beautiful. He swayed for a moment, finding his balance, and then stood perfectly still, head raised high, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind for the first time without metal around his neck. Dylan had expected Goliath to bolt. He thought Goliath was going to run as soon as he could, as free as a bird can fly. Dylan was still weary of Goliath, but at this point, Goliath was ready to start anew as well. Most horses would have run the moment they were free, especially after being chained for God knows how long. Instead, Goliath turned that magnificent head toward him and took a single careful step in his direction. Dylan was beginning to feel confident in the beast, but something was still lingering about him. Is Goliath finally ready to accept Dylan as his companion? Then another, and another until he stood close enough that Dylan could feel the warmth radiating from the horse's massive body. Very slowly, Dylan raised his hand toward Goliath's muzzle. The horse didn't flinch or pull away. He could feel Goliath starting to trust him. Maybe this could be the sign that Goliath wanted to befriend him. Instead, he lowered his great head and allowed Dylan to stroke the velvet soft nose, his amber eyes never leaving Dylan's face. In that moment, something passed between man and horse. An understanding, a bond, a mutual recognition of two souls who had both known abandonment and were ready to trust again. Dylan looked deep into Goliath's eyes. In that moment, he knew this would be a bond for life. "Come on, Goliath," Dylan said softly. "Let's go home." This was the next chapter in their lives. The opportunity for both of them to start anew. For Dylan and Goliath, this was the first day of the rest of their lives. Now for the road ahead, and the hardships that were to come. The walk back to the ranch should have been simple. It was less than half a mile through fairly level terrain. But Goliath's condition was worse than Dylan had initially realized. It was as if the damage from the chains was more immense than what Dylan could see. They walked in the silence of companionship, a moment that was the start of something new. The great horse could only manage a few dozen steps before needing to rest, his breathing becoming labored with even minimal exertion. This told Dylan that Goliath was not as strong as he had hoped, but it was still an opportunity. A new start, after all. But, was he being naive? More than once, Dylan found himself wondering if he was watching a noble animal's final journey rather than a rescue. He had to accept the possibility that Goliath could not be saved. However, they were still able to continue on their trek to Dylan's ranch. With every passing moment, that new beginning grew closer. But Goliath refused to give up. Every time he stumbled, he caught himself. Every time he had to stop and rest, he would look at Dylan with those remarkable eyes and then push forward again. Goliath did not want to give up either, and this was something that resonated with Dylan. A refusal to give up, and persistence in the face of hardship. It took them nearly 2 hours to cover what should have been a 15-minute walk. But when they finally emerged from the forest, and Goliath saw the ranch spread out before him, something changed in the horse's posture. Was Goliath happy to see Dylan's ranch? Was he content to be at his side for the rest of their lives? His head came up higher, his ears pricked forward, and Dylan could have sworn he saw recognition in the animal's gaze, not of this specific place, but of what it represented. This was not just another place, this was a place for growth. A place for them to grow together in the new beginning. This was what he was hoping for, after all. Safety, food, a chance to heal, a chance to trust again. Getting Goliath settled required every bit of ingenuity Dylan could muster. This would be the hardest part, making Goliath feel comfortable. Dylan needed to put his best foot forward for Goliath. The old barn hadn't housed a horse in over a decade, and most of the stalls needed emergency repairs before they could safely contain an animal of Goliath's size. It was important for Goliath's well-being that this be done. His new beginning had to be started right, and this was a part of the beginning. It was their destiny. Dylan spent the rest of that first day patching holes in the wooden walls, spreading fresh straw, and rigging up a temporary water system using garden hoses and plastic buckets. The process was long and tedious, but the result would be for the best. His thoughts began to turn toward what he was going to feed Goliath with. Where would he even get the money? Goliath stood in the center of the barn aisle, watching Dylan work with the patient intelligence of an animal who understood that good things sometimes took time. There was a part of him that wondered if this was all worth it, but he knew it in his heart. This was more than just an act of goodwill. It was a sign of a new beginning for them both. Occasionally, he would wander over to investigate what Dylan was doing, his massive hooves making hollow sounds on the old wooden floor, but he never got in the way or showed any signs of the wildness that his previous owner had complained about in the note. The horse seemed to be appreciative for what he was doing for him. He wanted to build a relationship, after all. When Benjamin Whitmore returned from his weekly trip to town that evening, he stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of the enormous black horse standing peacefully in his barn. Benjamin was not fond of Goliath, though. Dylan had done this on his own and would be held accountable for that decision. At 72, Benjamin had seen enough of life to know that surprises usually meant trouble. But when Dylan explained how he'd found Goliath chained in the forest, the old rancher's weathered face softened with something Dylan had rarely seen there. Benjamin was finally beginning to show empathy for Goliath, and this made Dylan's new beginning even better. The journey would not be alone. "Son," Benjamin said quietly, running a gnarled hand along Goliath's neck. "I've been around horses my whole life. And I can tell you something about this one." Benjamin believed that this was the start of a new chapter for both of them. The chance to befriend a companion, and to allow that companionship to be a change in their lives. This isn't just any animal. This is the kind of horse that comes along once in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Dylan felt a warmth spread through his chest at the old man's words. And just like that, Benjamin agreed to help in their new life. He had been afraid that Benjamin would be angry about the unexpected addition to their small operation, maybe even demand that Dylan find somewhere else for Goliath to go. That was his biggest fear. But Benjamin agreed that it was a destiny for them, and this would be their chance. Instead, the rancher was looking at the great horse with something approaching awe. "But Dylan," Benjamin continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Taking care of an animal like this isn't going to be cheap. This would not come without hardship. A new beginning never does. He'll need special feed, veterinary care, probably therapy to get him back to full health. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? This would be the true test of their friendship. This would truly test the limits of what they could offer to each other." Dylan looked at Goliath, who was standing with his head lowered, those amber eyes half closed in what looked like contentment. The horse's ribs still showed through his coat. His wounds were still there, his scars were still visible. But there was a new beginning ahead. The wounds on his neck were still raw and angry, and Dylan had no idea how much it was going to cost to nurse him back to health. By any practical measure, keeping Goliath was probably the worst financial decision he could make. He had to believe that they could make it work. "I'm sure," Dylan said simply, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He believed that Goliath would be the friend that he had always dreamed of, and Goliath would be the companion that would allow him to turn a new leaf. This was a destiny. And so, the story of Dylan and Goliath continues. A story of unlikely friendship, of second chances, and of the healing power of connection. But the story doesn't end here. It's a story that continues to unfold, with each new day bringing new challenges and new triumphs. It's a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Now, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales of the West. We've got plenty more stories to share. Stories of cowboys, outlaws, and the women who tamed the West. And don't forget to leave a comment below and let us know what you think of Dylan and Goliath's story. Do you believe in second chances? Have you ever experienced the healing power of animals? We love hearing from you, and your support means the world to us. Remember to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. God bless, and happy trails. Remember to like and subscribe as well.